Because when you think about it, there are people who have lived in homes and never thought of redesigning the space. Not because they don't have the money, but they never saw the need to. So if you can recognize that design is a need, then it's a problem. I think for you to recognize the importance of design, it takes a level of exposure. Not necessarily knowledge, but I feel exposure. If you're exposed to good design, if you travel and you stay in a 5-star hotel, you can now imagine when you come back to your country, or when you come back to your home, you can think of, oh, that's what a 5-star hotel feels like. I want to design my house to feel like a 5-star hotel so I never have to leave again. So it's a mindset thing. Someone who has never experienced better, why would the person even think of wanting to improve their space? How will they understand that improving their space improves their well-being, except they're educated? So I think design is a luxury. So it's not something that's for everyone. There are universally, I'm sure everyone knows Dieter Rams. He made the famous calculator. I'll try and attach it to this video, and a lot of other things that are generally universally considered as being well-designed objects, but not everybody will find those things beautiful. And there are also some people who just like bourgeois and things that are just extra, and no fault to them, but if some of those things aren't beautiful, how do you gauge, how do you judge? So this leads me back into when I was in university. When I was writing my master's, my thesis was actually on visual aesthetic differences. It was quite a long topic. Aesthetic, I have to cut this video like many times. The title of what was the name again? Aesthetic differences in visual perception between architects and non-architects. So basically, in summary, what my thesis was about was why is it that architects will look at a building and say, oh, that building is beautiful, and a non-architect will look at the same building and say, oh, that building is ugly. There must be a reason, right? So that was what I tried to find out. That was my hypothesis. My hypothesis was that it was because of their educational background and the knowledge that architects gain throughout architecture school that conditions them and helps them and forces them rather to see buildings in a certain way. So if you go to architecture school, you're forced to get familiar with certain architects, Rem Koolhaas, all the famous architects. I don't want to have to mention all their names, Le Corbusier, and all of these famous modern architects. And what was the signature of their style? Clean lines, symmetry, asymmetry, order. Those are the things that we are taught. Even in architecture, we are taught about the principles of design, and part of those principles, unity, symmetry, asymmetry, balance, repetition, and all of that. But it causes us to see things different from the layman, because the layman doesn't know about any of these principles. They might see a building that looks like a horse and say, wow, that's amazing, wow, that's fantastic. They might spend an hour admiring that building. But an architect can come and see a building that looks like a horse and be like, this crap, who they designed this rubbish building? It's actually supposed to have like glass. Architects love when it's so transparent and clean lines and everything. But from my studies, from the thesis, I carried it out with about 100 people, 50 architects and 50 non-architects. And the disparity was glaring, There's a famous Philip Johnson glass house. I'll try and attach a picture here. The Philip Johnson glass house, I think 80 to 90% of architects who saw the cards. Oh, I need to explain. So the way I did the study was through a multiple sorting procedure. So what that procedure entails is that I have cards of different buildings, without writing the name and who was the famous architect, whatever, just different buildings. So I had about 20 buildings. 10 buildings were famous architectural buildings that we already knew, and 10 buildings were just some random buildings that were opposite, or that used the opposite of most of the architectural principles that we're familiar with. So just crazy buildings. I'll try and attach some of them to this video if I can. I doubt I'll have the time. But yeah, So most architects, when they see like famous architecture buildings, like let me say the Philip Johnson Glass House, they're like, they score it a high score, they explain why they really like it and all that. But when I show those kind of buildings to the non-architects, you know, even their responses are different. Where the architect will say, oh, I love this building because of the symmetry, I love the balance, I love the way the cantilever is shooting out. The non-architect will say, the building feels too empty, you know? The building feels too transparent. I feel naked in the building. I feel like this kind of building would be cold. Those are the kind of things that they say. So do you see the differences? Because the architect is looking at it from a different way, while the non-architect is thinking about it from a different way. They're thinking about themselves in the building, how they feel, how the building affects them. And when I think about this, it takes me back to Juhani Pallasmaa, because that's Juhani Pallasmaa's, sorry, I have a cold. That's Juhani Pallasmaa's main philosophy, the philosophy of phenomenology. Phenomenology. So what does that mean? Phenomenology means that architecture isn't built to be seen, like most people believe now. You just drive past, you see a building and you say, oh, that's a beautiful building and all that. No, architecture was never built to just be seen. It's built to be experienced. And that's why he calls it the phenomenon of architecture. Architecture should be experienced with your eyes, with your ears, with your nose, with your mouth. Okay, maybe not your mouth, with your skin, you know, the way you touch. Yeah. And yeah, it could be experienced with your mouth, with your taste as well, because you could put certain things in the air that make the air taste a certain way. So that's architecture. If we can create architecture that enthralls all our senses, then we've created good architecture. So catch you guys on the next episode.